rate and the decrease in the feed-in tariff, which is known as a FIT. Later that day, I responded to the press expressing my concern, to put it mildly, and now take this opportunity to share what the Ministry of Home Affairs is actively pursuing. As transparency is vital to this process, I am pleased to share the questions posed to the regulatory authority with the public in mind. The chief goal of those questions is to fully understand the methodology used to determine the various rates. We need to be sure the RA has considered all relevant parts of the Act and exercised the appropriate due diligence. Through my observations and experience with the RA, they have consistently shown that it operates with the utmost integrity. We want to ensure that that integrity and thoroughness of approach has continued with the recent decisions to dispel any doubt. To that end, we are also looking at both the requirements of the Regulatory Authority Act 2011 and those of the Electricity Act 2016. The goal is to ensure that the RA is living up to its responsibilities according to the law. And I just want to let you know some of what those responsibilities actually are. They exist under Section 12, they exist under Section 16, and they exist under Sections 50 of the Regulatory Act 2011. Let me be very clear. We want to make sure that the RA is doing the right thing. We are also exploring what legal options are available to us to pursue should it be clear that there was an error in the law through the inquiry that we are pursuing. I know that this process of discovery may take some time, and we look forward to updating the public in due course. With that said, I assure you this is not just saber rattling. If there are errors in the law, we will hold the RA accountable and make sure that any mistakes that are apparent are rectified. We understand that Bermuda's economy, Bermuda's people, and our environment actually deserve no less. And let me just also make it clear. Like everybody in Bermuda, I felt that my stomach was kicked by the announcement of the increase to the FAR and the reduction to the FIT, which speaks to the policy to try and promote the distribution of solar. And that adjustment potentially interferes with the government policy. So, yes, the FAR rate was increased. I, like every other person in this country, felt that something was terribly wrong. But as a minister, I must pursue a process of due diligence in a proper manner to get the truth. Because the people do want answers, and the government is here to make sure that the people get the answers they need around this issue. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Good afternoon, Minister. Thank you for your statement. And so you mentioned that you posed these questions to the RA. Is there any mechanism where the RA is, first instructed to inform the government of its rate changes or anything like that?
No.
No.
There is no legal requirement for them to inform. They operate independently in their assessment of any rates of a licensed entity upon which they regulate. The government does not get involved with any of the process directly of any of the adjustments or the process of disclosures that are around those rates. We do not. We are, it's the RA, as I repeat, stands independently under the Regulatory Act of 2011.
Okay. Um, do you have any insight into the RA in terms of granting that temporary approval to Belco, allowing it to set its new FAR?
We have posed questions to the RA on these issues, but frankly, those answers have not been satisfactory to this point. But I do have the capacity to ask questions and to give directions under the law. And we've asked and we've posed very specific questions, we've received answers. And as I stated earlier, I have an official communication that I have sent to the RA, of which we will provide the press shortly. So you'll be able to see exactly the questions that we have posed.
Any ideas on how long it could take to get a response from them? You said it may take some time.
Well, we expect answers as soon as possible, if not immediately, to all our questions. These, frankly, are questions that the RA should be able to easily answer if they have followed the proper process and due diligence in coming to the decisions that they have around the adjustment of the fuel adjustment rate or the feed-in tariff. These should be questions that they could answer fairly easily. We are specifically wanting to know the methodology that they use to come to the decisions on the applications, particularly that came from the utility, the licensed utility Belco, to approve the decision, the provisional decision as they have described it in their own documentation of that rate. We want to know how the process that they went through and also the ingredients in the FAR that they would have actually considered, which would have been a submission from the entity to come to the decision that they did. We need to know specifically very detailed answers, but they should be able to provide them.
So speaking of things that the government can control, we've talked about wind, solar, wave energy, potentially bringing down the cost of fuel. When's the earliest that this sort of project could come online? And is there a need more than ever now?
I would ask you to present those questions to the RA because they are overseeing the process around those. As you know, they recently had a public consultation around wind. They are the overseers of the implementation of the integrated resource plan as well. So the implementation of that diversification of energy goes through them. Although it continues to be the government's policy to support the diversification of our generation, moving away from fossil fuels and to finding more affordable and lower cost ways to not only generate energy, but also to ensure that the consumer actually benefits from any low cost and affordable efforts to lower energy, which I think is what we're trying to do. We believe that whatever's done, the use of these tools, whether it be the FAR or the FIT, should ultimately result in minimal exposure of the public, the general public, who need electricity as an essential, resource, that they are at the least exposure to any severe changes in price. It is evident that the decision around the FAR in particular doesn't seem to have done that or maintain that process. And we want further answers from the RA as to how they came to the decision that they did on the application for that adjustment.
Do you support less reliance on Belco's monopoly as an energy provider, and will renewables lead to increased competition?
The whole process that we're going through as a country, as articulated in the integrated resource plan, is to diversify the generation of energy, which will mean that not only Belco will be providing energy that is relied on for generation. It could mean others who might develop a wind and offshore wind farm. That doesn't necessarily have to be owned by Belco. It could be owned by some other suitable applicant. That is why, as you know, we are looking at through the innovation process, wave energy. That particular wave park is owned, at least it's in its development, by someone else. It will not be operated by Belco, but they will be selling energy back to Belco. And the same thing is with, as you right now, even right now, with the 6 megawatt finger that is owned and operated by someone else who sells that power back to Belco. Even as we speak, the incinerator itself, which is owned by government, sells power back to Belco. So we want to advance further the amount of diversification of generation in Bermuda. That is the plan. That is what the vision is. That is the goal by 2035. That is expected to be post 2035. That will be what Bermuda looks like.
Do you feel that this increase might have been necessary if Belco was fueled by LNG rather than heavy oil?
I cannot answer that question. That's perhaps a question better put to the RA, who have more technical understanding of these things, or to perhaps Belco. They can perhaps answer some questions about whether the use of different fuels might result in different cost structures, but that's better answered by them.
Sure. And we've just heard some speculation within the community. There was concern that the head of the RA currently is a former Belco employee. Are you, do you have any concerns with, perhaps the background of that individual in terms of decision making going forward?
The staff at the RA are very, very competent and able persons. As I said in my statement, I have a relationship with them, which I understand them to operate with the highest of integrity. So I'm not going to stand here and question any individual's integrity, because it's the institution of the RA under the law that I deal with. And that is what I'm going to keep my comments towards. I don't believe it's fair to speculate about where somebody may have worked before as to influence necessarily where they are now. We all, in Bermuda, it's a small place, work different places. It doesn't mean that we have a bias. But certainly the persons at the RA are highly skilled, have highly qualified expertise, and I have come to be very respectful and reliant on those expertise. I just want to make sure, as I've said in my statement, that everything is operated with the highest level of integrity and that the law has been followed. Let me be clear. As I said earlier, I felt just like everybody else, I had a kick in my stomach by that rate that was published. People are angry. People are upset. People are dealing with the high cost of food, higher mortgages, higher interest rates, and just higher overall cost of living, and potentially even less salary that's not moved to that. People are hurting. So to have such an increase imposed on them for an essential resource that they cannot live without is a problem. And it has resulted in serious negative response from the community. I would like to also say, I do not condone any acts of violence or any actions against anybody who works for Belco or anybody who works for the regulatory authority. That will not be tolerated either. Everybody has a right to protest. But I, like everybody else, felt not happy about what was announced earlier this week or over the weekend. And as a minister, though, I must pursue a process to get the answers so that the public can feel confident that this process is not going against them, or that somebody isn't, as you are alleging some have said, helping out the utility more than they should. That has not been my experience with the RA. I'm not going to suggest that that's the case, but it's important that the government stand up for the people's interests and make sure that they can be assured that none of that has happened, and that what the RA did in its processes was fit for purpose, was according to the law, and can stand up to the rigor that the public requires. And that also, ultimately, that the RA fulfills its mandate as protecting the consumer interest. That is also a part of their role. They are to protect the interests of consumers, not to become the very entity that the consumers cannot trust or feel is there representing them, as they have to engage often with a regulated entity that has a lot more money and a lot more power than they do.
Has there been much progress with revision to the Clean Air Act and in terms of having Belco be held liable for soot emissions and enhanced protections for area residents?
Well, that's another area that we are waiting answers from the RA on. As you would know, in July, I did send a correspondence and direction to the RA requesting that they take action on that matter. So there are a number of issues that the RA does have to act on in their role of protecting the consumer interests around the licensed entity. So again, it's the RA that will provide the uh, eventual answers as to what will happen in relation to Belco and the issue around the soot emissions.
I think that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Jasmine. Jonathan, show me that I can, there you go. Sure.
Good afternoon, Minister, and thanks for this. So maybe I might not have followed you, but surely if the RA makes errors under the law, does then the government not share part of the fault in that?
No, the RA operates independently. We have no role in the process that they do in fulfilling their duties as regulating licensed entities. The law is very clear, and you can go to the Regulatory Act of 2011 and see that the role of the minister, I cannot direct or interfere with the RA in their role of regulating any particular entity. That is against the law. If I do it, I am breaking the law, and I will never break the law. But I do have a role in being able to ensure that the RA is mindful of government policy and is mindful of what their role is as a matter of public interest. And I can certainly remind them on matters of policy and also as to what their role is. And if I find, and certainly as the minister responsible for the regulatory area, find that they may not have followed the law, the appropriate action can be taken by me as a minister, as a legislator, to actually correct any errors, or certainly work with them to correct any errors that may have appeared. But I certainly don't have any role in these specific decisions.
Oh, I know that. So what I meant was, I guess if it turns out that the RA has followed the procedure under the law as it was set, resulting in this, then, and the government writes the law, then there's a kind of mutual fault there, is there not?
I don't believe so. I mean, I'm not the one who goes through the process for them to make their decisions. They make their decisions independently.
Yeah.
But
under the law.
Of the, of the government. So the government empowers them to act independently to do certain things. The government doesn't have any role in them acting independently. That is their sole responsibility. So they have responsibility for what goes right, and they also have responsibility for what goes wrong. But I have responsibility to ensure that in the public interest and in a matter of policy that they do the right thing as well. I think that is fitting for my role in our relationship with the RA. They have served the country well as an independent body. I have confidence in that, but I think under the current conditions, the decisions that they've been made deserve much more critical review, and they should have to show transparency not only to myself but to the public that they've done the right things, that they've gone through the proper process. Although I think it's very clear that the public is not happy, so they will even have room potentially to make adjustments if they have, because this is a provisional. At least one of them is a provisional decision, of which they can make adjustment if need be. But it's still my duty, as I've outlined in my statement, to make sure that they follow the law, that they are operating with the highest level of integrity, and that they are transparent with the decisions that they make as a public body that operates under public law.
You touched on, I believe it's the FIT. That's the money I get back from my solar panels, and that
Yes.
they've cut the
Yes.
revenue that people are going to get. They basically admitted they had made miscalculated on that.
Well, that's
Is
a
that
concern.
not a bit of a kick in the teeth for us if they miscalculated it?
Well, kick in the teeth, kick in the stomach. I guess Bermudians are getting it really hard right now, but we can't have regulated entities having this sort of thing happening too often. The FIT has been set in a way to promote the uptake of renewable energy. Renewable energy is a key component of how our country is going to move away from the dependence on fossil fuel. Less use of fossil fuels means a lower demand and less that has to be purchased, which should actually mean that our exposure to the shocks of the price of the use of fuel and of fuel should reduce as well. So anything that retards that is a problem for the government, and certainly is a problem for all of us who desire for the country to move away from fossil fuels. So we will also be looking at that with the RA for them to show us a methodology upon which they felt they could reduce. I'm not happy with this, with the fit, frankly, going down, because I think it actually goes against the policy of us promoting the adoption of, particularly on a commercial level and a larger utility level, the use of renewables.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like they basically said, uh-oh, we didn't do it right. And so now it's cutting from what, 0.22 to 0.13, if I got it right?
It was 22 cents or so originally, and they reduced it down to 0.13.
Yeah, okay.
That's not, I mean, anyway, we know what has happened. I am taking the steps to address these concerns that the public has addressed on all these matters.
You used the term deeply concerned for yourself. I know they're independent. You said you put these questions. Is there anything else that you can do as minister?
Well, I actually said more than deeply concerned. That was me trying to be nice.
Okay.
Right.
But
I
I
am,
mean, you know, if you are deeply concerned, what, beyond asking questions, is there anything that you can do about it?
That is what we will evaluate, and we're exploring our options, I said in my statement, as to the appropriate legal actions we can possibly take if we find that things were not done properly.
With a 20% increase in bills, I mean, what can the government do? Can they, is it realistic to cut its own taxes to offset that?
I cannot speak to matters of what the government will do around its fiscal policy. That's a matter for the Minister of Finance. My concern is that, and you would appreciate that, that 4.4 cents of tax is a very small part of that price of the FIT, actually, and has not been changed in over 7 years. So despite the movement of the actual FAR, I'm sorry, the FAR, the FAR,
Yeah, okay.
right, that tax has been the same. So the government hasn't adjusted or changed that over at least 7 years. It goes back to the previous administration, that number. But that's a matter for the finance minister, and it'd be more appropriate to address him. My concern is the overall impact of the actual FAR in the adjustment that has been made by the RA upon the application of the utility, and whether that was evaluated and done correctly at all and according to the law. That will be my job, and I intend to get answers so that the public can have an understanding. And if necessary, the appropriate steps will be taken so that this doesn't happen again, if it turns out things were not done properly.
Just a few more. So we had the Bermuda Industrial Union calling on folks to stand against irrational price gap. And then there seemed to be this possibly potentially threat of violence in protesting with the warning that came from police. I mean, do you stand by the terms that the union used, or do you think the wording maybe went a little too far there?
I haven't seen the official statement from the union, but what I can say, as I said earlier, I do not condone any violent acts against anyone, whether it be the utility or anybody who works for the RA. Everyone has a right to freely protest in this country. We have a democratic rights that protect that, but they should not be violent. They should not be in a way that intimidates or threatens anyone. The issues that people have around the issues of the cost of living are real and are genuine, which is why I felt a need to make it clear to the public, we're going to act. We're not going to let this just sit and let the public's anxiety and fear and concern around this go unanswered. We are going to act, and we're going to address it directly with the RA.
Jasmine asked you regarding the question of heavy fuel oil, which was a query you directed towards the RA. If it turns out that part of this problem is that Belco has had to switch to heavy fuel oil for switch to a different fuel, I mean, should the customer really be paying for a problem that goes back to the North Power Station being configured for LNG?
Those are matters for the regulator to opine on, and those are actually very fair questions, but those are regulatory questions, and I think that it's best that those questions that you put to the regulator. Although I can tell you this, I do not feel that the Bermuda public should carry any burdens upon which they have not actually been responsible for.
Mm,
Certainly, we are all responsible for the use of energy, responsible for the consumption of that energy, and certainly the production of energy by the utility is based on the demand. But there are certain parts of that of which I don't believe where it imposes higher costs is necessarily fair. But these are regulatory questions because and it's for the regulator to play a role of being the balance between the utility, the licensed utility and provider, and the consumer. They need to play a role of institutional clarity to that relationship. And that role is to not only be fair to the licensed entity, but also to protect the interest of the consumer. That is the balance that the RA was designed to play. That is the role that regulatory entities in the electricity sector play around the world. And ours has, by and large, played a very good role in that. But where questions have to be answered, I will pursue those questions. I will make sure that those questions are properly answered and that transparency is around every aspect of what has been done here. That is what I'm pursuing.
So just for my clarity, do you know what type of fuel is being burned for electricity by Belco that's resulted in this change to the FAR?
I don't know specifically to this. Again, I would say that you present those questions to the regulator because they deal with the RA with the utility on the matters of their fuel usage and what they use and when. But I know that they use at least two types of fuel. Use the heavy oil, and they also use diesel for certain types of engines. Different engines, they use different types of fuel. But that's all I can say. I can't give you any more detail around that. Again, you could ask Belco that. They perhaps can give you more specifics around how they use, when they use, and what types of engines they use them on.
Whatever it is, I guess they're paying more for it. So can you say can you tell us where the status of the government investigation into the Belco emissions, where we're at with that?
Well, as I stated earlier, in July, we sent a correspondence to the regulator that they themselves, as a result of the environmental authorities' conclusions on the Clear Act, that there has been a nuisance, and that under the authority of the regulator, that they can act against the regulated entity around the issue of the soot discharges. So right now, we are awaiting action by the regulator around these issues with the licensed entity. So those are questions, again, as to what appropriate action they're going to take should be put to the RA. And you'll see that that was published on the 4th of July this year.
Oh, I see. So the government investigation side is wrapped up and done.
No, there are other pieces to it, but the principal actions to be taken against the regulator, against the regulated entity, are going to be through the RA. There are some there clearly are continuously environmental oversight, as you know, under the Clean Air Act being conducted by an environmental authority, and certainly under their license. Belco has certain standards and reporting they have to actually continue to do, which is still being done. But actions to those particular discharges and their impact on the residents is a matter that the RA has been tasked, and under their laws and under the laws that govern their operation, they have the power and duty to act.
Right. Oh, I think that does it for me, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Okay. Members of the media, that concludes today's press briefing. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.